Hello, my name is Mark Sturley. I'll be talking about the U.S. laws and policies affecting English language learners in the American school system. I'll be talking specifically about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Bilingual Education Act, and the effects of modern education policy. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public places, provided for the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. As far as education policy goes, this led not only to desegregation, but also required equal rights for all students. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states that no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, this is obviously important for the education system as a whole, but as far as English language learners go, this part of national origin will come into play, and we'll see how here with this Supreme Court case, Lau versus Nichols, and I have a little explanation here of how that happened.
The U.S. Supreme Court in the 1970s received a case out of the San Francisco Unified School District. The case is called Lau versus Nichols, and it established a very important principle which becomes the basis for the requirement for English as a second language in U.S. public schools. What the Supreme Court said in that case was that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects children who are not proficient in English and their parents from discrimination. And in order to provide them their rights, they need to be provided English as a second language in some valid form in order that they not only learn English, but also gain access to the content of instruction. Both of those goals are equally important, and both must be a result of whatever program the district undertakes.
Okay, so the key here is that the Supreme Court actually established the first requirement for English as a second language, ruling that Title VI entitles those people who aren't proficient in English the right to get the proper instruction, to have the equal education in the classroom. And so, the second major act policy that we'll be talking about is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Now, this was just 1 year after the Civil Rights Act and has been considered one of the most far-reaching federal legislations affecting education ever passed. And here's a soundbite from Lyndon Johnson describing the significance of this bill.
Schools. Since 1946, Congress tried repeatedly and failed repeatedly to enact measures for elementary and secondary education. And now, within the past 3 weeks, the House of Representatives, by a vote of 263 to 153, and the Senate by a vote of 73 to 18, have passed the most sweeping educational bill ever to come before Congress. It represents a major new commitment of the federal government to quality and equality in the schooling that we offer our young people.
Okay, so went beyond the Civil Rights Act to further emphasize equal access to education and establish high standards of accountability while providing necessary funds from the federal government to primary and secondary education. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968 is an amendment to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and this provides school districts with federal funds in the form of grants to establish innovative educational programs for students with limited English-speaking ability. It recognized that the federal government was responsible for educating immigrants to the U.S. and opened doors for bilingual education projects on local, state, and federal levels. Like Title VI and the Historic Civil Rights Act, the Bilingual Education Act was a consequence of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. These two historic policies really opened the door and led the way for bringing equity in the education system in America as a whole, and also transformed the way the federal government recognized education of English language learners. So let's see how modern education policy has played a role. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 was an act of Congress that was a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, signed into law by President George W. Bush. And here we have a short video about the effects of this act.
In January of 2002, after decades of empty lip service and political bickering, it seemed for a moment that what had proved impossible might suddenly be possible. Two men, a conservative Republican president and a leader of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, were ready to put aside their partisan differences for the sake of America's children. America, the world's only remaining superpower, the nation that had put a man on the moon, was finally going to fix education.
And now it's up to you, the local citizens of our great land, to stand up and demand no child, not one single child in America, is left behind.
It was a bold promise, and to make good on that promise, the architects of No Child Left Behind decided to measure every student in the country.
I understand taking tests aren't fun. Too bad. We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
Okay, so we can see that Left Behind was a lot more centered on state standards and testing students and their progress. And this was sort of the idea that by really measuring their progress and basing federal funds on that was going to really improve the education system. And so that obviously had an impact on English language learners' education, mainly through something called Title III, officially known as the English Language Acquisition, Language Enhancement, and Academic Achievement Act. And this specifically targeted limited English proficient children, and this kind of said that limited English proficient students must not only attain English proficiency, but simultaneously meet the same academic standards as their English-speaking peers in all content areas. So this had a lot of impact on English language learners, and these sort of testing and these demands were pretty strict, and they put a lot of accountability onto the English language programs in the U.S. And so after following No Child Left Behind comes the Every Student Succeeds Act, and No Child Left Behind was sort of regarded as a failure that fell far short of its goal to have 100% of students passing the state math and reading tests by 2014. And so this Every Student Succeeds Act was sort of the answer to the shortcomings of the No Child Left Behind Act. And this was also a reauthorization of the Elementary Education Act of 2015, and this was signed into law by President Obama in December 2015. And so, what impacts did it have on the English language learner classroom? It provided tried to provide the same level of equity, maintaining Title III from as a funding source from No Child Left Behind. It also recognized the large increase in the numbers of English learners in this country and increased the funding. It ensured that English language learners would be fully integrated into the system with marked progress, but ensured that funding would remain regardless of the levels of integration, so that schools could ensure that English learning students would be fully prepared before complete integration into the normal class. And it continued to require school districts to measure progress, but it went a step further to provide additional assistance and support to those schools that were deemed to have ineffective language instruction and educational programs. So it provided a lot more support where No Child Left Behind kind of made up for the lack of support from that policy. And so, in conclusion, the Civil Rights Act and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act are sort of the backbone of the initial progress and policy of recent times, and also the start of recognizing, the federal government recognizing bilingual education. You can see that it's continued to be improved upon throughout the years, and these reauthorizations of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act throughout the years, from No Child Left Behind and now Every Student Succeeds Act, all these policies have made their mark on English language learners and will continue to make their mark on them in the future. It seems through the latest Reformation policy reauthorization, Every Student Succeeds Act, that English language learners are getting even more emphasis and support in the classroom, and I hope to see that the policies in the future will continue to provide the necessary support for this demanding and growing demographic of students. Thank you for your time.